Good afternoon, Shanky. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sankarson Banerjee. I'm an independent consultant now. I used to be in the technology world as CIO of a few places, and my last stint was a CIO of a bank. And now I've become an independent consultant to banks, to NBFCs. That's what I do. One of my obsessions in life, as part of this job of CIO, I've been a CIO for many years, is that I realized that compared to many of the other countries, I worked a little bit outside. And when I came back to India, I realized that the productivity of the workforce in India is actually quite low. And I couldn't find a good reason why, because the American engineers that I worked with, many of them were educated in India along with me. And we have access to the same tools and software and knowledge and all that. But that seemed to be, so that's been one of my recent obsessions.
So, your big idea is that how do we improve white collar productivity in India?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you define the productivity, and where do you see the big difference, or how do you sort of talk about this idea to others?
See, there's many ways to define productivity, but the best way is revenue per employee. And revenue per employee is easy to measure, and we can measure it across many different industries. And as it turns out, India is one of the poorest in the world. Revenue per employee, even on high tech sectors like the IT sector, our revenue per employee between TCS and Accenture is 2.5 times of TCS almost.
And what's your intuition on the root cause? Why does this happen to us?
So, one thing that's been widely debated is, should we work longer hours? Actually, we already work fairly long hours. The average Indian works longer hours than almost anywhere in the developed world, and actually just marginally different from China. And China, of course, has dramatically higher productivity than us, but the difference in working hours is quite small, 47.7 versus 47.8, 48.7. But the main thing is that I feel India, the workforce is inefficient for three primary reasons. One is, we are a largely untrained workforce, or the training quality at the bottom is very poor. By the time we get up there, of course, we can get quite well trained and so on. But except for a small number of people who are highly skilled, by and large, the average workforce is not very skilled. It requires a lot of work by the company to get them to be skilled. And that's because our education system doesn't always churn out the best quality. Second is that internship programs in India are very poor. Everybody chases a degree, and not really, a lot of the US is high school plus internship. A lot of Germany's high school plus internship. We don't really do that. We chase degrees for the sake of it. And the person holding the degree isn't particularly interested in the degree or good at his job. And that wastes a lot of years of training, which have to be undone by a company. That's a big part of our workforce problem. We don't have a good underlying capability on the educational institutions. We don't have a good culture of learn at work. The second part is that, India, the management practices are still of the previous era. They're extremely hierarchical. In India, we say teams, but CIO decides. The teams are there just to implement. The teams don't decide and say, no, they don't tell the CIO, you're wrong, I'm better, I will decide what to do.
So, do you think this is a mindset problem, or is it because the workforce is untrained and poorly skilled?
No.
Is it a gap in?
It's largely a mindset problem, because the same people go to startups and are quite active and vocal and all that. The same people, of course, in the US, there's a natural filtration. The untrained people don't go to the US. But the fact is, it is a bit of a mindset problem. We are a very hierarchical culture. And the same thing in Japan. Japan is very poor innovation because it's a very hierarchical culture. No junior ever tells his senior that he's wrong. We are better than Japan, but we are definitely still an extremely hierarchical culture. And therefore, good ideas or better ways of doing things take forever. The CIO or the senior person learned his work 25 years ago. He's still using tools and practices of 25 years ago. His productivity measures are of 25 years ago. That's the biggest challenge. You're expecting something to be done in 10 days. It will get done in 10 days. In the US, they do it in 2 hours, but you're not expecting that. And that's been a big challenge. So because it's so hierarchical and nobody in the junior side tells you, but this can be done in 2 hours.
And your third answer that you alluded to was technology and your
Yes, yes.
lack of
So
updating
the other
benchmarks?
thing is we are very, very labor dependent, especially in the white collar. We are very dependent on people. That's how we plan things. That's how we execute things. That's how we reward it. We reward based on how many people report to you. And even the IT industry basically has been a manpower provider. And therefore, we've invested very poorly in tools. Again, these tools are widely available to us. Indian banking became electronic very late in life. Of course, then it did very well. It's now become far more productive than many other banks globally. But it took forever for us to even start on the journey of core banking because we thought, why? We have enough people, we'll just do files. And the people are cheap, so there is no incentive to do tools. But the productivity, the challenge is you can't improve it overnight. At some point, you run out of people, which is already happening in many industries. We just can't find enough people to fill the roles that we have. IT industry is one example. BPO is another example. We have very high attrition. We have and even banking and all that. They can't find people to fill their roles. Not just IT roles, even regular white collar roles like branch managers and all that. They just can't find people. Because suddenly we are a growth economy and there's a shortage of people because the supply was fixed. People supply will always be fixed. We have a very large supply, but it's still, there is a limit to how many people you can have. And across the world, if you notice, people have expanded using productivity tools. And that's the challenge we're facing, that we don't use tools very well. If 10 people were required to do a job, then 10 people are still required to do a job. If you look at revenue, even in banking, if you look at the number of people employed by banks in India, it is far higher than, let's say, Citibank in US employees or, Stanchart in Singapore will employ. Even a small bank like RBL used to have more than 12,000 people.
So do you think that because we started off with a high population and we were willing to throw people at the problem, that we never developed the mindset towards productivity?
Correct.
And as where the marginal advantage of labor keeps reducing, do you think we'll eventually get there, or do you think there needs to be some kind of massive tectonic shift, or something has to shake the system for us to switch our mindset?
See, this is where it gets interesting because India is actually a very open knowledge economy, and the startups of India are actually very efficient. 50% startup does what a 10,000 person bank does. So the startups are already embracing this quite easily. And India is a very argumentative, very open, as knowledge sharing goes, India is a very open society, unlike many other Oriental societies where even knowledge sharing is not considered to be, like you don't tell your boss what you learned. In India, it's quite argumentative. And increasingly, yes, the culture shift is happening. However, there are 2 or 3 challenges. One is the hierarchy part is still not really being challenged. People are still very hierarchical. People are still, looking upwards for an answer, as opposed to saying, I know the answer, I can find out the answer. And especially in periods of rapid technology change, it is the juniors who know the answer better than the seniors. But that is not really happening very fast. If you go to the US, even professors are addressed by their first names. In India, in 30 years, it has not changed. Even today, professors are always professor something or the other. Nobody calls me when I go to a lecture in campus Shanky. But in the US, it's been there for a long time. Because of that business, that just because I'm a student doesn't mean I know less. I may well know more in certain things. That culture is not changed. I don't think it will change that quickly because of the rate of change in the past is any indication. It will take some time. Second is, we still have cheap labor. And therefore, the market economics of investing in tools don't look good to most industries. So if you look at, India has negligible R&D budgets. R&D doesn't mean, Nobel Prize winning atomic physics. R&D means internal R&D usually. Spending money to figure out how to improve things. India, the average company spends negligible. Like, I'll be surprised if an average bank spends 2% on R&D.
So, and when you say R&D, you're also talking of internal process improvements,
I'm
like the
only talking
minor
of that.
stuff, not the cutting edge, because R&D sounds like research, right? Whereas you're saying innovation as practice.
Yes. Because what does a white collar worker or any white collar industry do? They're not doing cutting edge research in quantum computing. The open source revolution, for instance, is a good place where a lot of R&D goes in. A Facebook or a Twitter or this thing, many of the open source projects that you see today, Google's 20%, are internal R&D projects. They're not high-tech science, they're application of something, but they lead to dramatic improvements in the way people do things. That culture is missing in India. In India, nobody, if you say Google 20%, they will say, no, 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 work 20 hours more. But actually working longer means less productivity, not more. It means more production, but less productivity. Okay. Marginal production keeps decreasing. So therefore, India has been, as a culture, very, not very tool centric. And even factories in India are not very automated. There are two major resistances to automation. One resistance is loss of control. India is in love with control. We have a lot of red tape. We have a lot of internal rules. Second is, we are a very high distrust society. And we don't therefore distrust automation, because somebody has programmed it, you can't question it, you can't prevent it, even though most automation actually works perfectly well. And we distrust the fact that somebody has tested it and all that. That's like, I can't see it, therefore it must be. And that's been across. So like, I've been spending a lot of time trying to automate banking, and many of my colleagues have been similarly, and we ran into this problem that automation keeps getting stopped by the fact that they want checkpoints. And the checkpoints add to the cost of, both the cost of doing automation, and eventually, in fact, some cases makes the automation irrelevant because there's so many stops. Whereas if you look at globally, there's a lot more automation, there is a lot more straight through processing, there is a lot less reliance on people checking. We are so distrustful that we sign against our own signature. Yes. It's the only country in the world that does it. We constantly check everything. I mean, every process is checked and rechecked and re-rechecked. Our boarding passes are checked 3 times before you get on the plane. That culture is a big, big distraction to tool usage.
Do you see the introduction or the emergence of foreign capital in Indian markets to change that mindset? Because startups, there is a lot of foreign VC, PE money which goes into new age companies. And again, would like your thoughts on whether you mentioned Accenture versus Infi, right? One of them is foreign capital
versus TCS.
So in one company, there is some foreign capital. So do you see foreign capital pushing a change in cultural mindsets?
Well, TCS also has a lot of foreign capital. But the thing is, and Accenture's bulk of their workforce is in India, not even Indian, they're in India.
Right.
They're just more productive because of the way Accenture also invests in companies, the way they have many toolings. They have a lot of digital tooling companies which generate disproportionately high per person revenues. No, what has actually changed is not capital. Capital has been available there. I mean, even public sector is not short on capital. The problem is, what has changed is people coming back from the US.
And bringing in
work practices. Yeah. Work. Increasingly, India has become, it used to be a one-way brain drain. It's no longer a one-way brain drain. In fact, if anything, it's a 1.5 way. It goes one way and then half of it comes back. A lot of it comes back with a fair amount of knowledge and skill. Some of it at the bottom end, some of it at the top end. People who have made a lot of money in the US come back and do things here. People who have not made a lot of money, even at the bottom end, a lot of people are coming back saying life is better in India. Life is adequately good in India with the cultural add-on, as opposed to the US, where culturally speaking, Indians are very isolated.
So you're optimistic that it may change gradually.
It will change, yes.
You're still hoping for a shake-up at some point.
The only thing that is not changing is this respect for hierarchy. That unfortunately is still quite entrenched. And again, remember, a large part of the workforce is employed by the government. White collar, a big chunk is government employee. They don't really go abroad very much. Some of them do, some of them don't. Like banks, there is a certain amount that goes to foreign postings and so on. But there is still a very large percentage that has never been abroad and therefore never seen work practices of abroad. But in most other industries, in the white collar, Indians are going abroad and then coming back and bringing with them both the practices and the tools, metrics. No.
Okay.
See, the tools will come if you know what you're aiming for. The tools are available to us even today. There's nothing special about the tools.
Right.
In fact, the tools are widely available. So, simple things like DevOps, integrated development environments, have been available for donkey's years. But you'll see Indians still use very simple tools, notebook almost, because they're expected to do a work in a week. In the US, if you go and say, I'll do this in a week, they will laugh at you. So therefore, you'll say, okay, let me figure out how to do this work in a day. So if you're an average Google developer, it takes you almost 2 months before you can submit your first piece of code, because they've automated the entire process of checking your code. After you press that button, it goes straight into production. Now, the first time it takes 2 months, the next time it takes 2 minutes. And that we don't do. We take 2 months all the time. And this is a problem that, it's across Asia, but especially in India, we are very close to the US or Europe. We are very close to those economies that are highly productive. And therefore, we started to learn from them. But our cultural setups and, of course, the migration itself will take time. But we started at a very low base. We've always been everywhere one of the lowest productivity, and because of the colonial mindset where labor was cheap. The original colonial mindset was labor is free. And for a long time, we just treated labor. Our salaries were ridiculously low. When we first started work, our salaries, like right now, I think my day's salary equals my year's salary when I first started.
Sure.
So it's always been, and that remains with us, that labor is cheap.
So hopefully what we need is a better understanding of the yardstick to measure ourselves again, which means if the Indian workforce starts aiming for higher productivity, the tools are there, the capital is there, the skills can be trained. All you need is a mindset that says, let me aim for that goal, instead of being content with throwing people at the
correct. Remember, the same people who are educated here, they are the ones who built Facebook and Google and everything else. So there's no reason why they can't produce the same productivity here, except for the work culture.
On that note, thank you, Shanky.
Welcome.